Greetings, everyone. This video will be about what is understood as self-knowledge, self-inquiry. So, in the traditions of self-knowledge and self-inquiry, I propose that the word self is not a very helpful term. Many misunderstandings arise. Self-knowledge is better understood to be singularity-knowledge. Self-inquiry is better understood to be inquiry into the singularity. Why is this? It's because self-knowledge is something that is ultimately objective. Self-knowledge signifies the ultimate knowledge of reality, otherwise it wouldn't be an ultimate object of spiritual search. So if self-knowledge is the ultimate knowledge of reality, it must be objective and common to all beings. Otherwise, it wouldn't be absolutely real. So the word self, however, can produce misunderstandings and lead to great errors because the misunderstanding can arise that self-knowledge means subjective knowledge. Now, it is the case that in our spiritual searches, we often have to understand ourselves. We kind of have to trace a path within. That's the experience. We have to kind of get centered in our bodies, attain harmony in our bodies, understand the nature of our personalities, our minds, our egos, our individualities. Otherwise, we cannot have clear perceptions, especially in the spiritual search. We have to get those things right. So the spiritual search involves a clarification of the knowledge of ourselves. But it doesn't follow that from purifying the nature of the instrument, that the actual nature of the ultimate spiritual knowledge has the quality of that subjectivity. So, self-knowledge is actually completely objective. Here's a way to understand this. You can think of reality as composed of the space of material things, like the earth, human bodies, the sun, all material physical objects, and then also the space of intelligence, the space of intelligible truth. So if we are seeking the ultimate knowledge in the space of material things, our individual bodies, our subjectivity has nothing to do with it. For example, if we're starting from humanity, and we're tracing the path to the singularity, to the ultimate source in this material space, we'll go to the earth first. The earth is the ground, the source for human existence. Then we'll trace it to the sun. Then we'll trace it to the center of the galaxy. Then we'll trace it to the galaxy cluster structure, then to the supercluster, and so on, tracing the path properly to the singularity of the material space of things. So that's completely objective. Our bodies don't have anything to do with it in terms of the source of the material space of things. So you can see going to the singularity in the space of material things is objective, not subjective. Now, in the space of intelligence, it's also completely objective. Ultimately, numbers and shapes, the same numbers you work with in mathematics, the same shapes that you work with in geometry, numbers and shapes, which don't have any particular place in space, they're accessible, they're omnipresent, they're accessible to any rational intelligence, to any consciousness. Numbers and shapes which are completely objective are the source of the space of intelligence. So that's completely objective too. Our subjective minds, our subjective personalities have nothing to do with it in terms of the source of the space of intelligence. So right there you have it. For the space of material things, the source is completely objective, common to all beings, the singularity. And in the space of intelligence, the source is completely objective, having nothing to do with our subjectivity. It's not subjective knowledge at all. In the space of intelligence, the ultimate source is the number one. Just as if 7 people are doing mathematics on the 7 continents of the earth, the number one would be accessed by their different minds, but the actual number one would be something common and objective. It's the same way with the ultimate spiritual knowledge. And I'm speaking through reason. It's not as if I have any special experiences, but I'm speaking through intuition, through reason, through logic, through good thinking here. All this can be known through good thinking. So the number one is objective. Okay. So this is important for anyone on the path of what is understood to be self-knowledge and self-inquiry. Self-knowledge should be understood as singularity-knowledge. Here's another way to think about it. The singularity, the source of the universe, is the source of both the self and the other, the experience of the other. If you're encountering an other, or simply the experience of the other, where the other signifies that which is completely independent and distinct from any experience of yourself, any experience of selfhood, any experience of subjectivity. It's coming at you from a completely unpredictable place. The other. The other is also a part of reality. Otherwise, reality wouldn't be exciting. Reality wouldn't be reality. It wouldn't be real if it was simply covered by the familiar zone of your own individual consciousness. The yin and the yang. The reality includes both the sense of yourself and the sense of the other. It's the same thing with male and female. In sexuality, the brilliance, the transcendence, the sublimity of sexuality is that it is an encounter with the other. The other cannot be predicted, and the other is unknown. That is the thrill, the divinity in sexuality. So the singularity, which is the ultimate spiritual knowledge, the singularity is the source of everything, the source of the universe. The singularity is the source of both the self and the other. Now, the concept of the other, a lot of times people are afraid of it in the spiritual sphere, in the spiritual communities. The sense of the other is kind of dismissed. Everything should be traced to the self. However, unfortunately, this is a misunderstanding. The other is also a locus, a source of divinity. The other is also a part of divinity. So the singularity is the source of both the self and the other. That means if we understand the ultimate knowledge to be self-knowledge, misunderstandings are likely to arise. We are likely to enter into errors because reality is constituted by both the other and the self. But if we think of the ultimate spiritual knowledge in terms of self-knowledge, we'll have the wrong kind of expectation. We will likely kind of try to snuggle in subconsciously into something that feels like the self, that feels something like familiar, that's colored, that's characterized by the sense of I am. And that would be a delusion, unfortunately, because reality is infinite and it's composed of both the self, the feeling of the self, and the feeling of the other. So if we have the expectation that the ultimate spiritual knowledge is characterized by the experience of self and should be called self-knowledge, we will enter into a great misunderstanding. And we will not pursue the objective singularity with the most directness and efficiency because we'll have the wrong understanding of where we're going. Okay. Remember again, male and female, yin and yang. The sense of the other is an eternal part of experience as a conscious being in space and time. As a conscious being in the field of existence, the sense of the other will never be eliminated. That is the thrill, that is the joy of existence. That is the antidote to reality being stale, to reality being unexciting, to reality being limited. The unlimited, the infinite, signifies the interplay between the yin and the yang, the self and the other. So please, dear friends, please understand that self-knowledge is better understood to mean singularity knowledge. And I'm sure this is more intuitive. You can very easily grasp what I'm talking about when I say singularity knowledge, because even physicists work with this concept. It's easy to understand. That implies its correctness because it's very clear to the intelligence. But when we say self-knowledge, we're not ever sure what exactly that means, because the word self here, in the context of spirituality, has multiple meanings. So self-knowledge can mean knowledge of our individualities, which is necessary and important to have. We need to understand the nature of our histories as souls, of our minds, of the nature of our egos, of our individualities, of our personalities. It's critical knowledge to understand properly. So that can mean self-knowledge, but then self-knowledge is also taken to mean knowledge of the ultimate reality, taken to be the self. But as I've shown, the ultimate reality is not properly characterized as the self, but as the singularity, the one. Because the one, the singularity, is characterized by infinity, absolute transcendence, and it includes the realities of both the self and the other. So if we think of it in terms of the self, we'll have the wrong expectation of its nature, and will likely enter into a kind of a delusion, unfortunately, where we're remaining stagnant in a sphere of consciousness that's characterized by the experience of self, and we're not allowing ourselves to blossom into the unknown, to the infinite, going to the singularity. And so that is the thrill of spirituality, the blossoming into the infinite. That is the journey and the goal. Okay, so I believe this is very important to clarify this, to eliminate misunderstandings. Those on the path of self-knowledge, they're seeking the absolute truth. And it's not good to be under any misunderstandings about what the nature of the ultimate knowledge is. Self-knowledge is better understood to be singularity knowledge. Here's another way to think about this. So in the paths of self-knowledge and self-inquiry, there is often the emphasis on properly having knowledge of the nature of the I, the feeling of I, the I am, to understand this, to have awareness of it, to concentrate on it, to properly know it, and that this constitutes the path to the ultimate spiritual knowledge. So what is the structure of this? What is the framework? The principle of life is what is said to be the feeling of I, or I am. The use of the word I or I am, it's not a very fundamental concept because it's dependent on a constructed language in space and time. And moreover, it's possible to use only the third person to describe all things. So it and he or she or they. But it's not possible to use the first person to describe all things. So using the word I or I am it's not an ultimate concept, but sometimes it's taken to be, and that would be a misunderstanding. So the third person is actually more fundamental than the use of the first person, like I and me or we. So the third person, if we were to think about it in the third person, which would be the most accurate framework to look at this, we would understand that what we take to be the I or the I am is actually, or traces to, the principle of life, which is present in the human body, which we feel to be in our hearts, which is in our hearts. So in other words, what we feel to be I is the principle of life in the body, the reality of life in the body. Now that reality of life can be traced to the heart it goes along with the sense of touch. It can be traced to the heart. And then it traces to our intelligence. So you kind of transition from the level of materiality to the space of subtle things, into the space of intelligence. And then that principle of life, traced to our intelligence, ultimately traces to the objective singularity of all things, the one, which is absolute life. So that's the framework that's going on in the path of self-knowledge. You are tracing the reality of life present in you, in your individuality, all the way to the objective and universal, the singularity of the universe, which ultimately is incomprehensible. It's like a fractal. It's infinite. The contemplation of the singularity of the universe is infinite, and it can never come to an end. I'm speaking from logic, reason, and inference and proper thinking, not from a special experience, but from right thinking. All of this can be understood and known. And so it should be properly understood that life manifests both as the sense of I, the sense of the self, and also the sense of other. If we're encountering an enemy or something that is totally opposed to our individuality and its interests, and we have to include such things within our vision of reality if we're not to be closed-minded and narrow-minded. We have to think of things beyond just our own individual interests. The universe is composed of an infinite number of things. So things that are opposed to our individualities and our interests are just as real as things that are in line with our individual interests and our feelings of ourselves. So are we to deny that those things that constitute the other for us, things that oppose us, our enemies, are we to deny that those are also manifestations of life? We cannot logically deny that if we are to affirm that the singularity is absolute life. From the singularity originates all things. And so all things are composed of life, but not all things are composed of the sense of I, because the reality of the other is an eternal part of experience. So see how it can be a great misunderstanding if you interpret the ultimate knowledge, the ultimate spiritual knowledge, to be self-knowledge, knowledge of the I. It's important to think clearly to overcome this misunderstanding. When we say knowledge of the I, we mean knowledge of life as it is experienced to us. Knowledge of life as it is experienced to us is traced, must be traced to knowledge of life, which is infinite, incomprehensible, and exists absolutely, which we do not experience completely necessarily, because it's the transcendent, it's the absolute. If we could comprehend that life completely, then it wouldn't be the absolute reality, because the absolute reality by definition is infinite and unending. So now you have the insight that the path to understand the I, or the I am, means the path to understand the principle of life. And when we trace that principle of life, thinking about this to reason, we understand that the principle of life traces to the one, the singularity, absolute life, which is the source both of the I and of the other. And remember, the I and the other, just like the yin and the yang, are eternal parts of conscious experience for any rational being, in space or time, anywhere, anytime, any place. And this is the thrill, the joy of reality, that the scope, the brilliance, the nature of reality always transcends the nature of the subjective experiencer. This is the beauty of objectivity. Objectivity is the absolute. The absolute signifies pure objectivity. that which is common, the source of all beings. This is precisely like how the number 1 in mathematics is the source of all numbers and a potential object of cognition and experience for any rational being in space or time, any rational being in the space of intelligence. Now, an objection might arise. You might think, well, consciousness is subjective. And consciousness is the ultimate reality. So, of course, the knowledge of reality is going to have that subjective quality because consciousness is subjective. I need to inquire into my consciousness as a starting point in order to understand what consciousness is in general. So it is the case that the ultimate spiritual knowledge is subjective. It's the nature of consciousness, and consciousness is subjective. So that's a possible objection. Now, the response, I believe, is that consciousness is ultimately objective. We think it's subjective because we're thinking in terms of the bodily sense of self. So our intelligences are grounded in a physical biology in our brains. Our intelligences are grounded in our brains. And so to access our intelligence, it feels like we have to move away from the outer into the inner. But that's just because of the fact that we're working with a body in space and time. In itself, the space of intelligence doesn't have that spatial dimension. It is purely objective. In the same way, precisely, that the numbers of mathematics are objective. And the number 1 is the source of all consciousness. And the number 1 is objective. Therefore, it follows that all consciousness is objective. It's only because our body is located in space and time, and particularly with the sense of sight. All things that are seen by us are seen by our eyes. So there's this idea of moving through space back towards the subject. But in fact, we're tracing to our intelligence, and not the part of our intelligence that is working through the senses, but the part of our intelligence that is working in the objective space of intelligence. So subject and object there become cause and effect, not subject as in one thing witnessing another. But in the space of intelligence, cause and effect is the main logical category. And cause and effect is the ultimate category that we're working with when we're thinking about subject and object. And so, to respond to the objection, the inquiry into consciousness is an inquiry into something objective. And the ultimate subject is also something objective, except that object is without any parts. It's the one, pure simplicity in nature. So the one manifests as both the experience of the subject and the object, but the one is an object of thought, you can say with clarity, except that object of thought is without any parts. It's pure simplicity, pure unity in nature. And so it encompasses the experience of the subject and also the object. So that clarifies that the inquiry into our consciousness, the inquiry into consciousness, is ultimately characterized by objectivity, cause and effect. We're seeking the ultimate cause of all things, which is pure truth. Truth manifests as intelligence, pure logical truth, which is also pure life. Here is another point. the word self can mean two things, but the word singularity can only mean one thing in this context. Therefore, the word singularity is a better word to describe the ultimate spiritual knowledge. So the word self can mean our individual self and the ultimate source of all things, which is said to be, rather inaccurately, the self, because it is the inner kernel, the singularity of all things. And because we're projecting our own sense of source onto that ultimate objective source, we use the word self, rather similar to how we might say, well, if we're all elephants, well, the ultimate source must be an elephant too. But it's not the case. The singularity is the inner kernel of all things, but it doesn't have the same quality as the sense of self that we have, even though when we say self, it also indicates that we're going into the inner kernel of our individuality. So in summary, the word self can mean two things: the little self and the cosmic self, as it were. But the word singularity can only mean one thing. We know immediately what we're talking about, and that's the beauty of it. The singularity is the objective source of all things, the source of all existence. So thus, singularity knowledge is more clarifying and a more accurate term for the ultimate spiritual knowledge than self-knowledge. Now, I've communicated my understanding, my views, what I've come to in terms of my understanding of this topic. I offer it to you in the common discourse chamber, the table, the discussion table, and I invite you to offer your objections if you have any, to offer your critiques, to offer what you really think. Let's work together through this interaction. We can attain to something higher and better. So I offer my view, then you can offer your critiques, and I might be wrong. In fact, every finite intelligence is characterized by some degree of error. So there will always be some degree of error in whatever any intelligence, including me, anyone else will say. So I offer the views to the discussion table, and I invite you to collaborate in the comments, offer your understandings, and let's move together with goodwill and friendship in the circle of life to higher understandings and to beauty, to life, and to unity among humanity, and coming to understand the unity among all things. Wishing you well. Goodbye.